Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into a really fascinating space, exploring excerpts from BioniChaos, interactive biomedical tools and simulators. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to show you how these incredibly complex biomedical concepts can become, well, not just accessible, but surprisingly hands-on and even like fun. It's almost funny, isn't it, how engaging something so intricate can actually be?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, it's really about transforming that sort of passive learning into active exploration. It offers you this unique sandbox, to play in for understanding the human body and the technology that interacts with it.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this a bit. Imagine just trying to really get complex physiological data without seeing it move, seeing it react. These bionic chaos tools are not just static dashboards and more like dynamic learning environments. We're talking about tools where you can, practically play with brain waves or fine-tune heart rhythms. It sounds wild.
It is pretty wild. And what's fascinating here is how they take this raw, often really intricate data and turn it into these engaging interactive experiences. So for instance, you've got the modality comparison bubble chart. It visually compares different physiological and sensing modalities based on their temporal and spatial resolution. Have you ever wished you could literally sense the world with superhuman clarity?
Hmm.
Like, not just see something, but understand its every minuscule wiggle and hum. Maybe know the exact frequency of your cat's purr.
Or pinpoint the precise moment an idea sparks in your brain.
Yeah, it's a captivating thought, isn't it? Sort
Definitely.
of strip away the everyday noise and perceive things
Yeah.
differently. See the hidden details.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much what we're doing today on the deep dive. We're plunging into the fascinating and sometimes, let's be honest, comically contrasting world of sensing modalities.
Right. And we're not just talking about your standard cameras and microphones here.
No, no, we mean technologies that let us peek inside the human body or, scan our environment with incredible precision.
Or sometimes just enough precision to get by, which, as you said, is where some of the real fun starts.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack a stack of sources that compare these amazing technologies.
We'll be looking at three key things. How fast they capture data that's temporal resolution. Okay, speed.
How detailed their view is spatial resolution.
Got it. Detail.
And maybe the most telling part, how much they'll lighten your wallet. The cost.
Yes, the cost. Because you very quickly find these surprising trade-offs and sometimes just a delightful irony in picking the right tool.
Hmm.
Think of this as like your guided tour through the sensory marketplace. We'll see everything from the budget-friendly, just the fax ma'am options,
Circle slightly.
all the way up to the ultra-high-res, I need to know the atomic structure of that thought kind of devices.
And we'll explore that big question. Does more expensive really always mean better? Or can you sometimes get, surprisingly deep insights from humble beginnings?
Get to the core of it.
And what's really helpful, I think, from our sources is how they often visualize these things. You typically see them plotted on a 2D chart.
Okay, yeah.
So on the x-axis, you've got temporal resolution, how fast it is, capturing quick changes.
Faster means further to the right on the chart.
Exactly. And then on the y-axis, you have spatial resolution, how precise it is, pinpointing where things are happening.
Higher up means more detail, clearer picture.
Precisely. But here's the kicker, the part I find really neat.
Mm-hmm.
The size of the bubble representing each sensor on this chart. That shows its relative cost.
Oh, interesting. So you get speed, detail, and price, all in one visual.
You got it. It tells a whole story at a glance,
Yeah,
and you immediately see these clusters, these sort of quadrants, as the sources call them.
right. Each telling a different story about trade-offs.
Exactly. So let's start our tour, maybe in the bottom left corner, the humble heroes quadrant.
The humble heroes, I like that. Okay, so this is where the entry-level sensors live.
Pretty much. Perfect for when you just need a general idea, not a whole research paper's worth of data.
And crucially, they won't break the bank.
Not at all. Take the basic temperature sensor. The sources rate it like 2 out of 10 for temporal, 2 out of 10 for spatial.
So not fast, not detailed.
Right. But the cost, only the 3 out of 20. It's the ultimate are you hot or not sensor for body temperature. No frills.
It does one job, simply. It's like asking for the meaning of life and getting a maybe.
Checkles, exactly. Or look at Geosarita galvanic skin response. That's 2 temporal, only 1 spatial, and 5 for cost.
So slow again, and even less precise spatially. What's it good for then?
It gives you a general sense of stress or emotional arousal, like is someone generally worked up, but it won't tell you how stressed or what emotion.
It's like getting a vibe check through a really fuzzy old radio. You know something's happening.
But the details are lost in the static.
Yeah,
And then there's the standard webcam.
the workhorse.
Totally. Rated 3 temporal, 3 spatial, and a very friendly 4 for cost. Great for video calls, basic UI stuff.
But you're not going to read the titles on the books behind someone or track superfine movements.
Not a chance. It gets the basic job done.
So the ironic takeaway here, maybe, is that sometimes less is more, especially when the budget's tight.
Absolutely. They provide essential insights without needing, a government grant. They do their job quietly and affordably.
Okay, so that's the humble corner. Let's swing across the chart now, way over to the top right. The high rollers of resolution.
Laughs. Yes, the high rollers. This is where speed and precision are king, and the price tags, well, they're often eye-watering.
This is for when you need to count every single nerve firing, right?
Pretty much. Or map tiny variations in muscle activity. Let's look at magnetoencephalography, neurosensing.
Okay.
It scores a massive 9 out of 10 for temporal, 8 out of 10 for spatial.
Wow, so super fast and super detailed.
Exactly. But the cost, 20 out of 20, maxed out.
Ouch. So what makes it worth that?
Well, it's considered the gold standard for mapping brain activity non-invasively with high temporal and spatial accuracy. If you need to know exactly where and exactly when a neural event happens, with sampling up to, say, 5 kilohertz.
Like for tracking how the brain processes language second by second?
Mm.
Or finding the precise origin of a seizure?
Precisely those kinds of demanding applications. It justifies the cost when that level of detail is critical for research or clinical diagnosis.
Okay. And what about muscles? You mentioned mapping variations there.
Right, there's intramuscular EMG, that's also high 9 temporal, 8 spatial, and a hefty 17 for cost, used often in clinical diagnosis.
Intramuscular, so right inside the muscle, not just on the surface.
Exactly. It lets clinicians assess individual muscle fibers, individual motor units. Think diagnosing neuromuscular diseases where you need to detect very subtle problems. Sampling can go up to 10 kilohertz.
So it's like listening to a single violin in an orchestra versus the whole ensemble.
That's a great analogy. You get that fine-grained detail you just can't get from the surface.
But here comes the irony again, right? Let's talk fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging.
Yes, fMRI. A classic case study in trade-offs.
Okay, so spatially, it's amazing, right? 1 out of 10. You can pinpoint where stuff happens in the brain with incredible accuracy for research.
Absolutely stunning spatial detail.
But temporally, it gets a 1 out of 10. Sampling might be, what, once every second or two, 0.5 to 2 hertz.
Temporally, it's slow, glacial almost compared to neural activity. And the cost, also maxed out at 20 out of 20.
So how do researchers even use that? It's like having this hyper-detailed map of a city, but you only get traffic updates every 5 minutes. By then, the traffic jam might have cleared.
Chuckles. It is a challenge. They often use it to see which brain regions are activated during a sustained task, rather than the exact timing of individual thoughts. It's about the location over a period.
Okay.
And sometimes they combine it with master methods like EEG to try and get the best of both worlds, the where from fMRI and the when from EEG. The cost reflects the huge superconducting magnets, the complex setup. It really is a spare no expense approach to spatial detail.
Even if the when is significantly delayed.
Got it. So this really highlights that navigating this landscape is all about trade-offs.
Constantly getting both high speed and high detail at the same time, technically very difficult and usually incredibly expensive. You often have to choose. Do you need the crystal clear where or the lightning fast when?
Exactly. Let's revisit that fMRI versus EEG comparison. We said fMRI is 9 spatial, 1 temporal, 20 cost, great where, slow when.
Right.
High density EEG, that's maybe 8 temporal, 4 spatial, and 18 cost. So much faster when for things like brain-computer interfaces or tracking rapid responses.
But the where is fuzzier, less precise location.
Precisely. So the choice depends entirely on your question. Are you mapping static brain regions involved in a task or trying to capture a fleeting neural signal in real time?
It's a fundamental dilemma. And you see this everywhere, not just in brain imaging.
Oh, absolutely. Take video cameras. You've got your basic webcam, 3 temporal, 3 spatial, 4 cost, basic tracking. Then you jump to a high-end 4K camera, maybe 5 temporal, 8 spatial, 16 cost. Much better detail for motion capture research.
Okay, slower frame rate, but way more pixels.
Right. But then, if you need speed and decent detail for something like 3D tracking in VRR, you might go for a high-speed video that could be 8 temporal, 7 spatial, but cost goes up again to 18.
So you trade off some spatial resolution compared to the 4K, but gain a lot of speed.
Yeah.
It really shows, from watching your cat kind of vaguely on a webcam to capturing every tiny muscle twitch in its leap in super slow-mo, there's a price for every pixel and every frame per second.
Absolutely. And it puts those average stats in perspective around 5.9 temporal, 4.0 spatial, 11.2 cost. Most sensors land somewhere in that middle ground, balancing the features and the budget.
Which means the real skill isn't finding the objectively best sensor.
No, not at all.
It's finding the most suitable one for your specific needs, aligning the speed, the precision, the cost with what you're actually trying to do.
Whether that's building an interface, doing research, or just, exploring what's possible with biosensing.
And these choices play out across all sorts of categories, right? Neuro, cardio, visual, audio.
Muscle. Yeah, it's a diverse field. Look at audio. You've got your standard microphone, maybe 6 temporal, 1 spatial, 4 cost.
Okay, decent speed for voice, but terrible spatial. It just picks up sound generally.
Pretty much. Can you hear me now? Basic stuff. But then you have ultrasonic microphones.
Uh-huh.
Those jump to 9 temporal, 2 spatial, and 14 cost. Used for high-frequency analysis.
Listening to things we literally can't hear, like bats, or maybe finding tiny flaws in materials through vibration.
Exactly. Because sometimes hearing the dog whistle isn't enough. You need to hear the bat signal or diagnose a machine fault by its ultrasonic signature. It opens up totally different applications.
Fascinating. And cardio. We use ECGs all the time in fitness trackers.
Right, that's the ECG consumer. Probably around 6 temporal, 1 spatial, 6 cost. Great for tracking heart rate during exercise, basic wellness monitoring. Your fitness tracker's best buddy.
Just checking the pulse, making sure you're still ticking.
Exactly. But then there's the ECG, clinical. That steps up to 8 temporal, 2 spatial, and 12 cost.
So faster, a bit better spatially, and double the cost. Why the jump for clinical use?
Because for serious medical diagnosis, every beat really counts. Those subtle changes in the ECG waveform, tiny abnormalities that a consumer device would miss.
Those could be crucial for diagnosing a heart condition early.
Precisely. The clinical version needs that higher fidelity, that extra resolution in both time and signal detail to catch those critical nuances. It's designed for diagnostic precision.
It really paints a picture of this huge spectrum of tools, from the super simple and cheap to the incredibly complex and expensive.
And each one exists for a reason. Each one solves a particular problem, hitting a specific sweet spot on that temporal spatial cost chart.
So wrapping this up, why does this matter to, someone listening? This isn't just a list of specs.
No, it's more like a map for understanding how we gather information about the world electronically, and how those methods range from the beautifully simple to the staggeringly sophisticated.
It's knowing you don't need a meg machine to take your temperature.
Chuckles. Hopefully not.
But you might need something pretty powerful to truly map a thought process in detail.
And it just highlights the incredible range of tech we have now. Knowing about these trade-offs lets you ask better questions, get more targeted answers, whether you're designing something, doing research, or just curious. You can optimize for speed, or detail, or cost, depending on what actually matters.
So whether you're aiming to build the next big wearable or doing some really groundbreaking research, or maybe you're just deeply curious, hopefully you've now got a better feel for this vast spectrum of sensing.
From that humble temperature sensor, just asking hot or not, all the way to the mighty meg-tracing neural pathways, each gives us a unique window.
Defined by its speed, its detail, and that ever-present price tag.
And this deep dive, I think, really shows that being informed isn't about memorizing specs, it's about grasping those fundamental trade-offs.
And appreciating that sometimes the simplest, cheapest tool gives you exactly what you need.
While other times you really do have to pay for those extra pixels or those milliseconds of perception to make the next big discovery.
So here's a final thought to chew on. Given everything we've talked about, temporal resolution, spatial resolution, cost, if you could pick any one of these sensing modalities, and apply it to one specific part of your own daily life, what would you choose? And what fascinating or maybe even deeper ironic insights do you think it might reveal about your world?
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to gently click like, subscribe, and comment. Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on Bionic. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to gently click like, subscribe, and comment. Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
have you ever stopped to think about something kind of fascinating? I mean, uh, with every single move we make, our bodies are generating these tiny electrical signals.
Right, yeah, even just wiggling a finger.
Exactly.
They're-
From that tiny twitch to, walking down the street, it's all powered by these like invisible currents. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into that world, specifically electromyography, or EMG.
Mhm.
And building on that idea, our deep dive today focuses on a really insightful bit of tech, the EMG hand simulation tool.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and this isn't just like a picture. It's an interactive way for you to really explore that direct link between, say, making a fist or pointing and the electrical waveforms your muscles actually produce.
And that's a really key point, actually. Understanding what it's for is just as important as how it works.
Okay.
So our mission today basically is to unpack how this tool functions, what it's designed to teach you, and maybe just as important, what it's not meant for. And we'll touch on what's coming next for it, too.
And we've got some good stuff to work with. Our sources, they include detailed notes from development, technical descriptions. We even looked at some of the actual code behind it.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, we're getting a really granular view of how this simulation actually, comes alive for you, the user.
Good stuff. So maybe let's start with the basics. What is EMG?
Good idea.
So electromyography, it's essentially the process of capturing those electrical signals we talked about, the ones produced by your muscles when they contract.
Right.
Think of it like listening in on the electrical chatter of your muscles while they're busy working.
It's almost like hearing the body's hidden orchestra, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember when I first really got that, it kind of changed how I thought about just moving.
Yeah, it's fundamental.
And the great thing about this tool is how it makes that concept real. So it simulates the electrical activity that you would record if you had electrodes placed near the hand muscles.
Right, if you were doing it for real.
Exactly. And what's really neat is how it visualizes these signals, these waveforms showing the muscle activity, and it does it in real time as you interact. That's really the core idea it's built on.
So that's the concept. But how does it actually work for someone using it?
Well, it's surprisingly straightforward.
Yeah.
You've got this hand diagram on the screen, right?
Hmm?
You just click on a finger. That simulates it moving. And when you do that, you see the finger twitch slightly on the screen and bam, instantly, you see a corresponding jump in the recorded signals.
So it's immediate feedback.
Totally direct. A visual link between the action and the electrical result. And if you want to go faster, there are keyboard shortcuts, numbers 1 to 5 for the fingers. Plus, it works on touchscreens too.
And that real-time visualization is,
Yeah.
I think, what makes it so compelling.
Definitely.
As you click or tap, you see those EMG waveforms changing live, dynamically responding. Behind the scenes, the code's constantly updating the data, redrawing the signal paths on the graph.
Yeah.
It creates this really fluid, live picture of what's supposedly happening electrically.
What's also quite clever is how it adapts the display.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, depending on your screen width, it's not just about looking neat. It shows they really thought about the user experience, keeping it intuitive no matter the device.
Oh, okay.
So like on narrow screens, say a phone, the hand diagram sits above just one combined chart showing both electrode signals, saves space, keeps it all on one screen.
Makes sense.
But on a wider screen, like a desktop, the hand's on the left, and you get 2 separate charts for the electrodes, stacked vertically on the right. Gives you a more detailed view, uses the space better.
That is well thought out. And it has different modes, too, right, for learning?
Yeah, exactly. By default, it starts in demo mode.
Okay.
So the tool just automatically runs through simulating finger movements and showing the signals. Kind of lets you just watch and see how it works.
Right, passive learning.
And this is crucial if you decide to jump in yourself, click a finger, use a shortcut.
You
Well-
take control.
Demo mode pauses automatically. Then you can switch between demo and user-controlled mode whenever you want. There's a button, or you can just press the DHEMA key. Lets you learn at your own speed.
Very flexible.
So we've covered how you interact, what you see, but that leads to the big question, right? We're not actually wired up. So how does it make these signals? How are they simulated? That seems like the real magic here.
Yeah, that is the interesting part, isn't it? How does it fake it so convincingly?
Uh-huh.
Well, when a finger gets activated in the simulation, the tool applies specific preset amplitude patterns. These simulate what the 2 virtual electrodes would be picking up.
Okay, amplitude patterns. What does that mean exactly?
So these simulated signals, they're generated by combining mathematical functions, things like sine waves, but then crucially mixing them with random noise.
Random noise. Why add noise?
Well, that's actually key to making it feel more real. Real biological signals are never perfectly smooth or predictable. They're messy.
Ah, right. There's always background interference.
Exactly. So adding that randomness, that noise, on top of a base signal makes the waveform look much more like something you'd actually record. It also subtly teaches you about the challenges of interpreting real EMG.
Gotcha. And you mentioned specific patterns.
Yes, they've defined specific amplitude values for each finger across the two simulated electrodes. For instance, activating the thumb gives electrode 1 an amplitude of 3, and electrode 2 gets 5.
Okay.
Index finger, that's 5 for electrode 1, 3 for electrode 2. Middle finger is balanced 4 and 4. Ring finger is 3 and 5, like the thumb, interestingly. And the pinky is 2 and 4.
Wow, that's really specific. So those different number combinations, like 3 and 5 versus 5 and 3, that's what makes the signal look different for each finger.
Precisely. These aren't just random numbers. They're designed to create distinct electrical signatures for each finger's movement. It helps illustrate the principle that different muscle activation patterns create unique EMG waveforms.
Okay, that makes sense. It really drives home that different movements produce different signals.
Right.
But this brings up a critical point you touched on earlier. This is not real medical data, right?
Absolutely not. And that's probably the most important takeaway here.
Okay.
The purpose of this detailed simulation, the patterns, the noise, it's all geared towards one thing: providing an intuitive, accessible introduction to the principles of EMG. It's purely for education.
Right. So for someone wanting to learn about EMG, this sounds fantastic, but we need to be crystal clear. You wouldn't use this for any kind of real-world research or, say, medical diagnosis.
Definitely not. It is not intended for diagnosing neuromuscular problems, guiding physical therapy, or anything like that. It's a simulator, a
Yeah.
teaching aid. Think of it like a really sophisticated interactive textbook diagram, not a lab instrument.
That's a really important distinction to keep making. Educational tool, not diagnostic. Okay. So what about the future? Where does a tool like this go next?
Well, looking ahead, the developers have a clear vision. The focus is on keeping it simple, accessible, easy to use all on one screen.
Right.
And importantly, keeping it free from proprietary closed source stuff. Openness seems key.
Okay. Any new features planned?
Yeah, the really exciting part is they plan to incorporate other types of biomedical signals too.
Oh, like what?
Things like electroencephalograms, EEGs, brain activity signals, and electrocardiograms, ECGs, the heart's electrical signals.
Wow. Okay. So expanding beyond just muscles, that would broaden its educational reach quite a bit.
Massively. Imagine being able to interactively explore brain waves or heart rhythms in the same intuitive way.
That does sound powerful. Simulating brain activity, though, that must be way more complex than muscle signals, right? Are there unique challenges there?
Oh, undoubtedly. EEG signals are incredibly complex, influenced by so many factors. Simulating them meaningfully but simply will be a big challenge, but the potential payoff for learning is huge.
Yeah, I can see that. And you mentioned keeping it accessible. How are they managing that?
Well, on a practical note, the project welcomes feedback from users, and they also seek support through Patreon.
Crowdfunding.
Exactly. That support helps them enhance the features, improve the visuals, and crucially, maintain it as a free and open source resource for everyone.
That's great. Keeps it available for students, educators, anyone curious, really.
Precisely.
So let's kind of wrap this up. What we've seen in this deep dive is how a cleverly designed simulation can take something pretty complex, like EMG, and make it really accessible and, frankly, quite engaging for anyone. It turns these abstract scientific ideas into something you can actually play with and understand.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of interactive learning.
Totally.
And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to sort of chew on.
Okay.
Consider how tools like this, these interactive simulations, how could they change learning in other fields entirely? Imagine making quantum physics less abstract or complex economic models more tangible. It could really spark curiosity in ways we haven't even thought of yet, maybe fundamentally change how we learn new things.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're plunging into the fascinating world of brain signals.
Yeah, and we're using a source that describes a specific tool, an advanced EEG signal simulator.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. What's our goal here? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, the mission is really to get a handle on what these EEG signals actually are, how they're, put together from their basic parts.
And what gets in the way? Like noise and stuff.
Exactly. Interference. What messes up clean recordings. And critically, how a tool like this simulator we're looking at helps us learn about these really complex waveforms.
Because, I mean, think about it. Our brains are constantly going all this electrical activity.
Non-stop.
And being able to measure that, understand it, that seems absolutely key for insights into like different cognitive states, right? Or diagnosing neurological problems.
Or even just grasping general brain function on a deeper level. It's fundamental.
Right.
And that's really where a simulator like the one in our source comes into play. It lets us generate a synthetic signal.
Synthetic, like artificial.
Yeah. Basically an artificially created waveform, but one that mimics the characteristics of real brain activity.
How does it do that?
Well, the source explains it lets you combine the fundamental brain waves, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and then, crucially, it lets you add in common types of noise, artifacts, they call them.
Artifacts. Okay,
Yeah.
so instead of just getting this like messy real-world recording,
Which can be really chaotic, yeah.
this tool lets you build the signal piece by piece. See the components.
Exactly. You can isolate things, see how they interact. So, whether you're just curious about this stuff or maybe you need to get the basics down quickly.
This deep dive should give you that foundation.
Right. And what's really interesting, as the source points out, is how this kind of tool serves, well, two main groups. For someone new to EEG, it's like an intuitive playground. You tweak things, see the results instantly, helps build that gut feeling for how it works.
Makes sense. Learn by doing.
But then for someone more experienced, maybe, say, an engineer developing signal processing algorithms, it's a reliable utility.
How so?
Because you have this controllable, predictable signal, you know exactly what went into it, so you can test your algorithms maybe for filtering out that noise we mentioned, or even for developing brain-computer interfaces.
Gotcha. A controlled test bed. So, based on the source, how is this thing actually structured? How does it work?
So it describes the application as being split, basically. Control panels on one side, where you set everything up, configure the signal, and visualizations on the other side, where you see the results. You change something in the controls.
And the graphs update immediately.
Dynamically, yeah. So on that control side, there are a few key sections that really help illustrate how we characterize brain signals. First, brain state presets.
Presets, like pre-configured settings.
Exactly. And this is super helpful because, as the source notes, different mental states tend to correlate with different patterns of brainwaves.
Oh, right. Like being relaxed versus focused.
Precisely. So you might select relaxed meditative, and the simulator automatically boosts the alpha wave amplitude that's typically strong, around 8 to 12 hertz when you're relaxed but awake. It's a quick way to see a representative signal for a known state.
Ah, okay. So you don't have to manually guess what a relaxed brain signal looks like. It shows you a typical composition. That's pretty smart.
It really helps connect the states to the signals. And then there's the artifact simulations section. This is so important.
Why is that?
Because, and the source really emphasizes this, real-world EEG is almost always contaminated. You get electrical signals that aren't actually coming from the brain itself.
Right, like muscle movements.
Exactly. The simulator lets you dial in common ones. You can add muscle artifact, that's EMG signal. It shows up as high-frequency noise, kind of spiky, from things like clenching your jaw or even just scalp muscle tension.
Yeah, the source mentions those look like really fast, messy spikes in the data.
Oh, they can totally swamp the brain signals you're trying to see. And then there's eye blink artifact EOG. That shows up differently.
How so?
As large, slow wave spikes, usually below like 1 hertz. It happens because your eye itself has an electrical charge, a dipole, and when you blink, it moves, creating this big voltage shift.
Wow. So being able to simulate these, it really drives home why cleaning up real EEG data is such a big deal. You have to get rid of this stuff first.
Absolutely. It makes you appreciate just how complex those real recordings are and why signal processing is essential.
Okay, so beyond presets and artifacts, what else can you control?
Well, then you have the fine-tune waves control panel. This is where you get really granular. You can adjust the fundamental brainwave components individually.
The delta, theta, alpha, beta waves.
Yep, delta, usually 0.5 to 4 hertz, deep sleep territory. Theta, 4 to 8 hertz, think drowsiness, light sleep, sometimes creativity. Alpha, 8 to 12 hertz, that relaxed wakefulness we mentioned. And beta, 13 to 30 hertz for active thinking, being alert, focused.
And you can just adjust sliders for these.
There's a simple mode, yeah, with sliders to quickly change the relative strength, the amplitude of each band. Easy way to play around.
But the source mentioned a customize mode too, for digging deeper.
Exactly. In customized mode, you can get really specific. You can set the precise center frequency for a waveband.
Okay.
The bandwidth, like how spread out the frequencies are around that center point, and of course, the amplitude or power for each one.
So you could try and replicate specific findings from a research paper or something.
Precisely. Or just explore how changing just one parameter, like bandwidth, affects the overall look of the signal and its spectrum. Very powerful for understanding the building blocks.
And there was something about spectrum overlays mentioned in the controls section, dotted lines.
Right. Those show up on the power spectrum graph, which we'll get to. These overlays represent the sort of theoretical ideal shape of each pure brainwave band you've configured, like the raw ingredient before mixing.
Okay, like the ideal alpha shape, the ideal beta shape.
Exactly. Which leads us nicely into the visualization side. 2 main graphs are presented in the source.
Right.
First, the power spectrum. This one's shown in the frequency domain.
Frequency domain, meaning it shows frequencies, not time.
Correct. It's generated by applying a mathematical tool called a fast Fourier transform, an FFT, to the raw signal. Think of the FFT as deconstructing the complex signal that changes over time and showing you how much energy or power is packed into each specific frequency. So you see peaks where your dominant brainwaves are. It's absolutely crucial for seeing the underlying frequency components.
Got it. So it tells you what frequencies are strongest in the mix and the other graph.
That's the simulated EEG waveform. This one is in the time domain. It shows the raw composite signal, the voltage just fluctuating up and down over time, typically over like a 5-second window, the source says.
Ah, so that's the trace that looks like the classic brainwave recording.
Exactly. And it's literally the sum of everything you've added, all the individual brainwaves plus any artifacts you dialed in. It's the final mixed signal.
Okay. Now, here's something the source really flags as important. You mentioned those dotted ideal overlays on the power spectrum graph. And then there's the actual computed spectrum, the filled-in blue area from the final mixed signal. The source says they don't line up perfectly, right? Even if you only have one main wave active.
Right. And that's not a glitch. It's actually a really key concept the simulator helps illustrate visually. It's fundamental to how waves work.
Okay, so why don't they match? Why isn't the final spectrum just a perfect stack of those ideal shapes?
It comes down to interference. The source uses a great analogy. think of that final blue spectrum, the one computed from the waveform, as a cocktail.
A cocktail.
It's made by mixing all your ingredients, delta, theta, alpha, beta, plus any EMG or EOG noise you added. Those dotted overlays, though, they're like looking at one pure ingredient in isolation before it got mixed into the drink.
Okay, I like that. The cocktail analogy works. Things blend. They don't just sit there separately.
Precisely. When you add waves together in the time domain to create that single up and down waveform trace, they interfere with each other constantly. At some points in time, the peaks of different waves might line up. They add together, making a bigger peak. That's constructive interference.
Okay, adding up.
But at other moments, a peak from one wave might align with a trough, a dip from another wave. They partially cancel each other out. That's destructive interference.
Ah, okay, so this adding and subtracting is happening all the time along the waveform.
All the time across the entire signal. So when you then take that final combined interfered with waveform and run the FFT on it to see its frequency components.
The result isn't just those neat ideal curves stacked up.
Exactly. The resulting power spectrum, that blue area, is more complex. It's, lumpy, as the source describes it. It reflects how those pure components actually interacted over time to create the final signal you see.
So the overlays show the ideal ingredients, but the blue area shows the actual cocktail after mixing and interaction.
Perfectly put. The overlays are still super useful. They guide your eye, showing you where the energy should be concentrated based on your settings. But the blue area is the reality of the combined signal's frequency content. The simulator makes this relationship much, much more intuitive.
Yeah, you can see it directly instead of just imagining equations. It shows why the sum of the parts looks different in the frequency domain compared to the time domain.
It really demystifies that link between the raw signal and its frequency breakdown.
Okay, so let's wrap this part up. What does this all mean? We've taken this deep dive into the EEG signal simulator. We understand its purpose education, algorithm testing.
Right, we looked at its parts. The brain state presets for typical patterns, the artifact simulation is super important for understanding real-world challenges like muscle noise, EMG, and eye blinks, EOG.
And the fine-tuning controls.
Mm-hmm.
Simple sliders, but also that customized mode for setting specific frequency, bandwidth, amplitude for each wave, delta, theta, alpha, beta.
Then the visualizations, the power spectrum, using the FFT to show power per frequency. That's the frequency domain view.
And the simulated EEG waveform, the raw signal over time, the time domain view.
And we really hit that key concept why the actual signal spectrum, that blue area, looks different from the ideal overlays.
Right, it's all about signal interference. Constructive and destructive interaction between the waves and the time domain.
Meaning the final frequency breakdown isn't just a simple sum of ideal shapes, it's more complex, like that cocktail analogy. Seeing that visually is a huge takeaway.
Absolutely. And the source also touched on future ideas for a tool like this.
Yeah, some exciting directions. Adding more waveforms like gamma waves, those faster frequencies above 30 hertz, often linked to higher cognitive stuff.
Okay.
Simulating more artifact types, maybe EKG from the heart, or that annoying 50 or 60 hertz hum from power lines.
Oh yeah, that hum gets everywhere.
Definitely. Also, more advanced analysis like spectrograms, which show how the frequency spectrum changes over time. Multi-channel simulation to look at patterns across different scalp locations.
So simulating a whole head of electrodes.
Potentially, yeah. And even maybe importing real-time data. Lots of possibilities.
So ultimately, this simulator, as the source presents it, it's this dynamic learning tool for newcomers, right?
Yeah.
But also a practical utility for people already in the field.
Exactly. It makes the complexities of EEG, which can seem pretty daunting, much more intuitive and interactive. It helps bridge that gap between the raw squiggly lines you record and the frequency information hidden inside them.
By letting you build it up yourself and see the connections.
Precisely. It demystifies that relationship.
Which actually leads to a pretty important question to leave you, the listener, with.
Okay.
Given how dramatically these artifacts and just the natural interaction between different brain waves can change the signal we actually see. Change it from those clean, ideal components.
Yeah, in ways we can't always predict perfectly in real life.
Right. So how might that reality influence how we interpret real clinical EEG recordings, where we don't have the luxury of knowing the exact ingredients that went in?
Good question.
And what does that imply for building tools like brain-computer interfaces that need to be really robust and accurate? How do they deal with all that inherent noise and complex interaction to reliably figure out what the brain is actually doing?
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to gently click like, subscribe, and comment.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into the world of EEG data today, which, as you probably know, is basically trying to read the brain's electrical signals.
Right.
But analyzing it, well, especially when you're hunting for something like a seizure, it's just incredibly challenging.
Hmm.
Seizures aren't steady, are they? They're dynamic, they change moment to moment, pop up, they're non-stationary events.
Exactly. And that non-stationary nature, that's precisely why a lot of standard analysis methods kind of fall short.
Okay.
They might just miss those really subtle quick spikes or, the specific ways the background brain rhythms shift during a seizure.
Right, like trying to get a whole song just from one beat.
Yeah, or just one instrument's part.
Yeah.
You really need the whole picture, how it all unfolds over time.
And that brings us to our source material today. It introduces a pretty fascinating approach, this joint time-frequency scattering tool, designed specifically for this challenge. So our mission here is to figure out what this tool actually is, how it gives us that deeper look, and why this advanced perspective is so important for spotting those tricky seizure patterns.
The core idea, the breakthrough really, is recognizing you need both. You need to see how the signal changes over time, that's the time domain, and what frequencies are active at each moment.
Time and frequency.
This tool brings those two views together.
Okay, so we need the when and the what kind of brainwave right now.
Right.
How does it actually do that? This joint analysis, the source mentions a couple of key techniques.
Well, it leans heavily on something called the wavelet scattering transform.
Okay.
Think of it like not just breaking the signal down, but doing it at multiple resolutions or scales all at once.
Like zooming in and out simultaneously?
Sort of like looking super close for tiny details, then backing up to see the bigger shapes, and crucially how those views relate. That's the scattering part, how features interact across different scales.
Ah, so it's grabbing details that simpler methods might just average out or miss entirely.
Precisely. It's really good at catching those quick high-frequency bursts, potential seizure spikes, but also those slower underlying shifts in brain rhythm. You get this much richer, multi-layered view.
Got it. And the frequency part, how does that fit in?
That's where the FFT comes in the fast Fourier transform. It's a classic for figuring out the dominant frequencies.
Right.
So the tool uses FFT alongside the wavelet scattering to paint that full-time frequency picture.
And the way it displays this sounds helpful. The source mentions seeing the raw EEG, maybe in blue, right next to the transform data, maybe red, both on a time chart and a frequency chart.
Yes, that side-by-side visual comparison is, well, it's crucial. You can literally see how the scattering transform pulls out characteristics or changes that are way less obvious in the raw signal.
Makes those patterns jump out.
Exactly.
And it's interactive, too, which is cool. There's a scale parameter slider. What does tweaking that do?
Adjusting the scale parameter. It's like changing the focus on your wavelet lens. A bigger scale smooths things out more.
Okay.
Makes the broader, slower trends pop, maybe reduces some noise. A smaller scale lets you zoom in on the sharper, more localized features.
So you can experiment.
Right. You play with it to see which scale best reveals those potential seizure patterns in whatever data you're looking at.
That makes sense. Lets you really tailor the analysis. And there's also an input for EG data length.
Yeah, that's important too. Seizures aren't always just a split-second thing. They can evolve over seconds, minutes sometimes.
Right. They might have a rhythm or pattern.
Exactly. So being able to look at and analyze longer chunks of data helps you spot that kind of sustained activity or periodicity that you definitely miss in just a short clip. Plus, more data means a more robust frequency analysis.
Okay, so pulling this all together,
Right.
what's the big takeaway? What does this let people do that was maybe harder before?
Um, Fundamentally, it provides a much more sophisticated way to look at these really complex non-stationary signals, like EEG during seizures,
A better
a
lens.
much better lens, yeah. By revealing patterns hidden from standard methods, it really boosts the potential for, earlier or more accurate detection. It's super valuable for researchers, students, anyone interested in EEG and neuroscience. It connects the complex theory with something practical.
Yeah, it definitely takes it beyond just spotting spikes. It feels like you're getting at the signal's actual texture, its dynamics.
Mhm.
So here's something to think about. If combining these different perspectives, time, frequency, different scales, can reveal hidden seizure patterns in brainwaves, well, what other complex signals, maybe biological, maybe even things in nature, might be holding secrets that we can only unlock when we look at them through multiple lenses like this, all at the same time?
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to gently click like, subscribe, and comment.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the show that dives into the sources so you don't have to, bringing you the core insights. And today, we're really getting personal. What if we said we could actually get inside your head? Not, metaphorically, like literally connect to the electrical buzz of your brain.
It is a pretty wild thought, isn't it? Maybe a little unsettling too. So this deep dive, it's all about that world, the sometimes weird, always evolving field of electrophysiological brain interfaces. We're going to unpack the tech that lets us listen in on neurons, the electrodes, where we put them, and maybe crucially, how invasive we're willing to get for a better signal.
Yeah, we've dug into this really comprehensive review. It pulls together clinical stuff, research findings, technical details. It's kind of our roadmap for today.
And you see right away, it's all about trade-offs. Always. Usability versus how good the signal is, risk versus reward, and just this constant push for more data, more information, sometimes no matter the cost, to your scalp or even deeper.
Okay, so let's start at square one. The earliest attempts to listen in, the first brain earphones, if you will. And yeah, the journey's been well, messy.
Definitely messy. For, gosh, decades, the absolute gold standard for non-invasive recording has been the wet electrode. Think little silver chloride cups or discs.
Ah, yes, the classics. And they need that conductive gel, right? Sometimes with these great names like LGLLP.
Yeah.
And didn't they require some scalp prep?
They did, yeah. Often a light abrasive scrub.
Mm.
You literally gently abrade the outer skin layer. That prep plus the gel gets you really low electrical resistance, low impedance.
Mhm.
That's key for picking up those tiny brain signals cleanly. Superior quality.
The trade-off. It's messy, right? Gel in your hair, needing a serious wash afterwards. It's kind of funny, the gold standard being so, well, inconvenient.
Utterly inconvenient. It really is. So naturally, people thought, okay, there has to be a less gooey way.
Yeah.
And that led to the dream of dry electrodes.
The usability dream. Just stick them on and go. No gel, no paste, no scrubbing.
That's the idea. Direct mechanical contact. You see designs like little mushroom pins or comb shapes. Conductive silicone. Sounds perfect.
Almost too perfect. What's the catch?
The catch is physics, basically.
Hmm?
A fundamental electrochemical challenge.
Mm.
You get much higher skin electrode impedance, that electrical resistance we mentioned.
Ah, so the signals struggle to get through cleanly.
Exactly. Which means a lower SNR signal-to-noise ratio. More noise, less actual brain signal. The readings are less stable, much more prone to interference from just moving your head or nearby electrical noise. And some of those rigid pin designs, they can get pretty uncomfortable if you wear them for a while. So, ironically, chasing comfort sometimes made things less comfortable, or at least way less reliable.
Right, the classic fix one thing, break another scenario. So is there a middle way?
There usually is. A strategic compromise emerged. Semi-dry or water-based electrodes. These use just a tiny bit of liquid, maybe a sponge soaked in saline or a solid gel that's prehydrated with water. They're trying to bridge the gap.
The happy medium. Faster setup and cleanup than the full wet mess, right? But maybe more stable signals than the purely dry ones. Getting closer to that wet quality.
Pretty much, yeah. A decent balance. And then, looking further ahead, you get into the really futuristic stuff. Novel and soft electrodes. We're talking cutting-edge materials here, conductive polymers, graphene, carbon nanotubes,
Yeah.
stuff that can really conform to the skin, often built into, like, smart headbands or clothing.
Okay, now that sounds like sci-fi. Super comfortable, biocompatible. You could wear it long-term without really noticing, but I'm guessing expensive. And maybe performance is still a bit variable.
Naturally more expensive, yeah.
Yeah.
And performance can vary quite a bit. It's still very much an active area of research and development, the bleeding edge.
Mm.
But this whole evolution leads to a really key innovation.
Mm.
The difference between active and passive electrodes. This was a game changer.
Explain that. Passive is the old way.
Right. Passive electrodes are just simple conductors. They pick up the brain's tiny signals and send them completely unaltered down a wire to an amplifier somewhere else. Which means, if that wire is long, the signal is incredibly vulnerable to noise contamination, unless your initial connection, that impedance, is super, super low, like less than 2K, which is hard to get without the gel and prep.
So you needed the mess just to get a signal strong enough to survive the journey down the wire.
Exactly. Now, active electrodes, that was the major leap. They put a tiny preamplifier right inside the electrode housing itself. It boosts the signal right at the source.
Ah, so you amplify it before it travels down the wire and picks up all that noise?
Precisely. It dramatically improves the signal-to-noise ratio right from the start. And this is huge because it means active electrodes can work effectively even with much higher impedance levels, up to, say, 500K. This is what really made high-performance dry electrode systems practical. It kind of sidestepped that core impedance problem.
That makes so much sense. It's like putting a microphone booster right next to the quiet sound source instead of at the end of a long, noisy cable.
A perfect analogy. So this whole electrode story just shows this constant back and forth, doesn't it? Chasing signal fidelity, but also needing things to be usable in the real world. It's a cycle.
It really is. Okay, so we've grappled with how we listen, the electrodes themselves. But then there's the question of where on the head you put them. Because location matters, right? A signal from the wrong spot isn't very helpful.
Absolutely critical. For EEG data to mean anything scientifically or clinically, it has to be reproducible. You need standardized placements.
And the original standard, the kind of foundational map, is the 1020 system from, what, the 1950s?
1958, Herbert
Okay.
Jasper. Yeah. It's called 1020 because the distances between electrodes are set at 10% or 20% of the total distance between specific skull landmarks. Like from the bridge of your nose,
Yeah.
the nation, to that bump on the back of your head, the Indian, and between your ears.
and it gave us that standard naming. FP for front, C for central, P for parietal, O for occipital, T for temporal, odd numbers left, even right, Z down the middle.
That's the one. FDCCC for the midline. It was brilliant for its time, provided a common
Good.
language.
Science marches on. Cognitive neuroscience got more sophisticated, needing better spatial resolution, trying to pinpoint where activity was happening more precisely.
Exactly. Things like source localization algorithms demanded more detail than the original 21 electrodes of the 1020 could provide. So they developed the 1010 system, basically an extended 1020.
More points on the map.
Significantly more, up to 74 standard positions. It adds intermediate sites, filling in the gaps at 10% intervals. But here's a slightly funny or maybe frustrating detail for people learning this stuff.
Uh-oh. What did they do?
To make the naming more consistent across the denser grid, they had to rename some of the original well-known 1020 sites, like the old T3 became T7, the old T5 became P7.
Wait, really? So you had to relearn parts of the map just for naming consistency? That sounds potentially confusing.
It can be. But the goal was a more logical system overall as density increased. And it didn't stop there. The kind of future system, especially for really high-density setups, think 128, 256, 300-plus channels, is the 10.5 system, using even smaller 5% distance increments.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is the 10 to 5 the official standard now?
Not quite. It's widely used in research software, definitely, but it hasn't been formally adopted as the official standard yet. So you see this tight co-evolution, right? The hardware gets better, allowing more channels, research demands more precision, the mapping systems adapt. The nomenclature becomes this functional coordinate system for the scalp.
It's like the map is constantly being redrawn to keep up with our ability to explore the territory, a perpetually updating GPS for your skull.
That's a good way to put it. More detail, finer granularity.
Okay. Electrodes sorted. Placement maps charted. Now for the big one, the potentially uncomfortable question. How deep are you willing to go? Because the sources are really clear on this. Move electrodes closer to the neurons, signal quality goes way up, dramatically. But so do the risks, the costs, the ethical questions. This is where it gets, maybe a bit dark, but also fascinating.
It's the core dilemma. Let's start on the surface. Scalp EEG. Totally non-invasive. Electrodes just sit on your scalp. No surgery, minimal risk, safest option by far.
Sounds good, easy peasy. But the big but, the skull gets in the way, right?
Massively. The skull acts like, well, an electrical insulator and filter. It smears the signal like looking through frosted glass. This means poor spatial resolution, hard to tell exactly where the signal came from, lowest signal-to-noise ratio, and it's super susceptible to artifacts, muscle twitches, eye blinks, even your heartbeat can interfere.
So safe, but blurry. And not great for detailed control, like with brain-computer interfaces, low information rate.
Very low, typically 5 to 25 bits per minute. Think basic communication, simple commands, not fine motor control.
Okay, so step one deeper, semi-invasive. Getting closer, but not inside the brain tissue itself.
Right. The main example here is electrocorticography, ECOG, sometimes called intracranial EEG or IEEG. This involves a major surgery, a craniotomy, where they temporarily remove a piece of the skull.
Whoa. Okay, removing skull, that's serious.
It is, to place electrode grids or strips directly onto the surface of the brain. The signal quality jump. Huge, vastly better than scalp EEG. SNR is way higher, you get millimeter scale spatial resolution, and crucially, you get clear access to high-frequency brain signals that the skull normally blocks.
But the risk, infection, bleeding, it's still major brain surgery.
Absolutely, significant risks. High reward in terms of signal, but high risk physically. There's also a sort of in-between approach here, subgale or subdermal electrode.
Subileal, so under the scalp, but on top of the skull. Or just under the skin.
It's exactly. Minimally invasive. Implanted between scalp and skull or just beneath the skin layer. No craniotomy needed, just small incisions.
Interesting. So less risky than ECOG. What's the signal like? Does the skull still interfere?
The skull still reduces the amplitude, the strength of the signal somewhat. But the key finding is that it doesn't seem to selectively filter or distort the frequency content much, especially in that important high gamma range. So you can potentially record useful high-frequency activity with much less surgical risk than opening the skull. It's a promising area.
Okay, finding clever ways around the skull. But now, let's go all the way. Fully invasive, penetrating the brain itself.
This is where things get really targeted. First, stereoelectroencephalography, or SEEG. This is really the modern standard for invasive deep brain recording, particularly in epilepsy investigations.
Stereo EEG sounds precise. How does it work?
They use stereotactic guidance. Think of it like a high-precision 3D navigation system for the surgeon. And they drill very small holes in the skull, called burr holes, maybe just 1 or 2 millimeters wide. Through these tiny holes, they carefully insert thin, flexible electrodes deep into specific target structures within the brain.
So not just on the surface like ECOG, but into the brain volume, accessing deeper areas.
Exactly. Structures like the hippocampus, memory, the insula, the amygdala, emotion, areas hidden in the folds, sulci. You get true 3D sampling. Plus, you can easily do bilateral explorations record from both sides of the brain at once. And importantly, compared to the large craniotomy needed for ECOG grids, SIG is considered less invasive overall, with a lower rate of major complications. Still brain surgery, still risky, but relatively safer than wide-open ECOG.
Okay, deep access 3D picture, relatively less invasive than the alternative. Makes sense why it's become a standard, but there's one step further, isn't there? The most invasive.
There is. Intracortical microelectrode arrays. Things like the Utah array. These don't just go deep, they actually penetrate the outer layer of the brain, the cerebral cortex, by a few millimeters.
Whoa. Literally sticking tiny needles into the thinking part of the brain. Why? What do you gain?
You gain the ultimate signal, the activity of individual neurons, action potentials, spikes. This gives you the highest possible spatial resolution neuron by neuron and the highest temporal resolution millisecond by millisecond. It's the most granular view possible.
The ultimate risk.
Unquestionably. Highest surgical risk, potential for tissue damage, and a big challenge is long-term stability. The brain reacts to these foreign objects by forming scar tissue around them. It's called gliosis. Over time, this can insulate the electrodes and make them less effective. But this is where you get those really high BCI data rates, 100, 200 bits per minute. The kind needed for complex, nuanced control of advanced robotic limbs, for example.
So the potential to move a robotic arm with your thoughts, but it requires the most invasive tech with significant long-term challenges. A very direct trade-off.
It really is.
Yeah.
And notice how the information gain isn't smooth. It happens in steps. Scalp to ECOG. You bypass the skull's filtering, get high frequencies, big jump. ECOG surface to SIG, deep. You go from 2D to 3D, access hidden structures, different kind of information, macro electrodes like ECOG-C, recording population activity, to microelectrodes, MEAs.
Yeah.
You go from crowds of neurons to individual voices. Another huge qualitative leap.
It's not just more information, it's fundamentally different information at each level of invasiveness.
Exactly. Which brings us to the real world. How are these different tools actually used? And what choices are being made?
Right. Applications, obviously clinical diagnostics.
Huge. Epilepsy is a major one, using everything from scalp EEG for initial diagnosis to SIG for planning surgery, also sleep disorders, checking for brain death, foundational stuff.
And brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, we touched on that, from basic communication for people who are locked in.
Using non-invasive scalp EEG, all the way to those sophisticated robotic prosthetics using invasive MEAs. And the research is pushing into some interesting areas. Decoding navigation intentions from the hippocampus, trying to read emotional states from the limbic system. The possibilities are expanding rapidly.
Yeah, interesting is one word for it. Opens up a whole can of ethical worms down the line, potentially. What else?
Neuroscience research, of course. Mapping cognitive functions like attention, memory, language. EEG's temporal resolution, its speed, is still unmatched for tracking brain processes in real time. Think of classic experiments identifying things like the P300 wave, that little electrical blip your brain makes about 300 milliseconds after an unexpected or meaningful event. EEG is perfect for catching that.
And then the slightly more, let's say, commercially minded applications, neuromarketing.
Yes. Using EEG to see how someone's brain reacts to an advertisement or a product. Trying to get objective, implicit insights into engagement or emotional response.
So your brain activity becomes market research data. Welcome to the future, I guess. Here's the dark humor. Your brain is now a focus group, no verbal feedback required.
It definitely highlights the range of applications, from life-saving medicine to optimizing ad campaigns. But let's look at a really critical clinical comparison. CD versus the older approach using subdural grids, a type of ECOG, for epilepsy surgery planning. For a long time, which one you got often just depended on where you went.
Right. Different hospitals preferred different methods, but there's better evidence now.
Much better. A big study using an international registry compared outcomes. And the results were, well, illuminating. They found that patients evaluated with the subdural grids were actually more likely to end up having surgery afterwards. About 40% higher odds.
Okay, so grids led to surgery more often. That sounds good. Or maybe not.
Well, here's the twist. Even though grid evaluations led to surgery more often, the patients who had surgery guided by SIG were significantly more likely to be seizure-free in the long run. The numbers were roughly 55% seizure freedom with Sieg-guided surgery versus about 41% with grid-guided surgery.
Wow. So grids might get you to the operating room more readily, but Sieg seems to lead to a better outcome if you do have surgery.
Exactly. And maybe even more importantly, the subdural grids had a significantly higher rate of major complications, like almost triple the risk. 9.6% major complication rate versus 3.3% for Sieg.
Okay, that's huge. So Siege is safer and leads to better long-term seizure control, even if it results in slightly fewer surgeries overall.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. It looks like Sieg allows for more precise localization, leading to more targeted and effective resections when surgery is performed, and avoid some unnecessary or riskier surgeries. It's a real case study in how more precise, albeit complex, technology can lead to better, safer outcomes. Quality over quantity, you could say.
Absolutely. A fascinating clinical example. And finally, we can't ignore the practicalities, cost and usability.
Right. It's a massive spectrum. Consumer-grade stuff, like the Muse headband for meditation, can be under $1,000. Research-grade systems, you're looking at mid-range from maybe 1K up to 25K, and the really high-end 256-plus channel systems go way higher.
And the clinical invasive systems, Siege, ECOG, MEAs, the cost isn't just the hardware, is it?
Not at all. The hardware cost is significant, but it's dwarfed by the surgery costs, the hospital stay, the teams of highly specialized doctors, nurses, technicians. The overall cost is implicitly the highest by far.
So it always comes back to that trade-off, no single best tech. It's about picking the right tool for the specific job, balancing all these factors: signal quality, invasiveness, risk, usability, and, yeah, cost.
Precisely. You match the tool to the question you're asking or the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, let's wrap this deep dive up. Quick recap of the big themes. First, that constant push-pull in electrode tech between getting the best signal and making it practical to use, driven by innovations like active electrodes.
Second, how the maps we use to place electrodes 10-20, 10-10, 10-5 have evolved right alongside the hardware and what researchers need to know, turning anatomical points into a functional brain coordinate system.
And third, that step function idea. Going deeper isn't just getting more signal, it's getting fundamentally different kinds of information. Scalp potentials, surface activity, deep structure, single neurons, qualitative leaps.
Yeah, the whole field is moving so fast, out of the lab, increasingly into clinical practice, and even starting to edge into consumer applications. It's changing how we see the brain.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. As these brain interfaces become more common, from wellness apps to potentially life-changing medical devices, how will you personally weigh the incredible potential benefits against those inherent risks? And against the often surprising costs, personal, ethical, financial, of truly, literally getting inside your head?
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to gently click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
Everything we do is available freely on BioniChaos.com. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and don't forget to click like, subscribe, and comment.
And there is a human in the loop, just in case you're wondering. If you have any questions. Any final questions before we finish? Go check out the website. Provide your feedback. It's all under development at the moment, so this will be a good time to provide your feedback. But you will have to check the website first. Yeah, there is a human. Someone was wondering. There is a human. Yeah. Just about. Well, if I lose my voice, it's not a problem. Likely we have Notebook LM. And we're doing development, well, pretty much using any LLM under the sun. It's alright, we stream pretty much daily, sometimes even a couple times a day, so don't forget to subscribe so you get a notification of when we are live. And as the robot said, everything we do is available on BioniChaos.com. Go check it out. Provide your feedback. And no, this is not a university project. Provide your feedback so we can develop better tools for you. I'm doing simulation like this one. Some of them work better on bigger screens, so I'm not normally testing on mobile. If you want to test on mobile, go for it. But then we essentially be getting one of the LLMs, Gemini or GPT or Claude, to update the code to make it work better on mobile. I know this one on mobile you can rotate the model of the cochlea and everything, but then you cannot move the array, which is a bit unfortunate, kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing. But yeah, if I don't forget, next time I'll ask Gemini or someone to make it work better on smaller screens. Touchscreen works on this one, but yeah, touchscreen, there's different components. You can scroll through the page on touchscreen, then you can rotate your 3D model, can do different things, change the size of this chart, but then most importantly you should be able to move the electrode array in to the cochlea structure. So let me know if there are any specific questions. I think we had like 5 subscribers during this stream, so thank you very much. But don't forget to check the website as well. There is a human in the loop. The human in the loop meant to be a biomedical engineering expert, data science expert. But yeah, don't trust anyone. Go check everything yourself. And I'll see you next time. Have to run. Bye.